So just over a year ago, my mom found out that I was making a zettelkasten and you were in school at the time, and I think that you realized its potential power, especially for your education experience, but presumably for afterward as well. You shared it with your classmates. And I'm just wondering, I guess, what did you notice about the zettelkasten that made you want to maybe adopt it for yourself? What value did you think that zettelkasten could have in your life?
As far as like being in grad school, the real immediate application would be you're taking one field of study but different courses within it, but everything relates to itself, like to each other. You're writing a paper and think, oh, I was just thinking about this in another class and the prof said this and then I read this other thing But it's like the trail is too cold. I will remember you're reading too many things to remember where everything came from. And if I'd kept better notes of everything in the lectures while I was reading articles, I would have done a better job connecting all those dots and bringing my own knowledge out of all of that. And it would have strengthened my papers and just my own understandings, I think.
And I would argue that that would not, like taking better notes, I don't think would have helped. You know, it helps a little bit. Taking poor notes versus taking good notes, it helps a bit, but I don't think it is the thing that improves your abilities as an academic.
Yeah, I guess I don't mean, because I've got notebooks full and binders of the notes that I took, but everything on this topic is in this one, everything on this topic is on that one. And I don't know, because they're all sort of in the same realm. I don't know for sure where it was I heard that one particular nugget. I wrote down a great quote from this prof, who I could cite the prof, but I don't even remember which prof it was and which class it was. And I'm like I've had the experience of like flipping through, like, no, not that one, not that one. Also, I listen to CBC, and there'll be articles there, and I'm like, oh, that is so interesting. And that reminds me of this. And I'll write that in my journal. So I've also got personal notebooks with not all brilliant, but occasionally brilliant observations and connections.
So you need a way to mine all of those sources for the brilliant and important and useful and like what we would call a permanent note in zettelkasten terminology, and then only access just those permanent notes. You don't want to have to wade through this sea of just your random thoughts while listening to CBC. You just want to take out what you might need later and then be able to search and find that. And then also, if you can search and find it, also have your CBC journaling talk to your academic notes from 3 years ago.
Or a lecture that I've just attended, or a conversation with friends. And then that makes you think I should read this book, and then blah, 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 blah. And there was like this feeling of, I wish I could Google search my mind.
Yeah, exactly. That is kind of what zettelkasten gives, but it's even better than that, because you know, it's actually your Google mind. And so you can expand upon that and add to that, and it actually aids your brain. Really having a zettelkasten is having a dialogue partner, is what Nicholas Luhmann called it. It's having someone to communicate with. Something, but like really it's an active source that is putting forward ideas that you then have to respond to. So you're kind of helping each other. You're helping the zettelkasten grow, and its growth is helping you grow it more, which is helping you do all those other things that you articulated, write papers, remember things, etc.
And I'd like to maybe write a book, or at least a blog. Lots of people want to have a blog, and maybe that blog would be a book. It's so overwhelming thinking about trying to churn through everything I've thought or known or read or heard to bring some coherence to my writing.
Yeah, totally. Zettelkasten has a kind of built-in coherence. You're making it coherent as you build it. And it's coherent specifically to you and the uses that you have for it in your life. That's a big part of it. Every time you put a card into the system, you have to ask, when will I want to find this card again? So you're creating the coherence that is necessary for future you, which is awesome.
Another use that I don't know if I'll do this project, but I've been journaling since, I don't know when I wasn't. So since I was able to write, and I was 6 and someone gave me my first journal. So I've always been journaling. And every notebook, journal, diary, the majority of it is probably stuff that nobody ever needs to read again. But some of it isn't. So it would be nice if I had the time to go through those, force myself to endure my past ramblings, and pull out some of the things, either themes, like I keep coming back to this theme of why do I want a dog over the years, and what have I thought in previous years. The really nice thing would be then, say I was looking for another dog, I could ask past me, what have I thought about this in the past?
Yeah, zettelkasten is kind of past you. that's externalized and just stored. There's techniques within zettelkasten that you can use to find this information easily. For instance, there's something called hub notes that Lumen would use, which is kind of like a note that just references other notes. So you might end up with a hub note over time, all about dogs, because there's just been so much about dogs that you kind of want somewhere to catalog it so that if you ever need to ask a question about dogs, you just go to this one piece of paper. Or we've also talked about if you're working on a specific project and the project ideas are coming from throughout your zettelkasten, another way to organize that might be to put little colored themed sticky tabs up out of your zettelkasten. Then when the project's over, you just remove those sticky tabs. But while you're working on the project, you just put your pink sticky tab on every card relevant to that project, and then when you go to work on it, you just pull out all of the pink cards. So there are ways to store relevant information with itself, even though the zettelkasten like spans all of the topics within your life. Anyway, it sounds like yes, you could use the zettelkasten. You have tried in the past. I've gotten Obsidian on your computer and you gave it a go, and of course you've watched my videos, but it hasn't stuck. So I'm wondering, you're now turning to a physical zettelkasten, and what makes you think that a physical zettelkasten is going to be easier or more helpful for you than a digital one?
It's the sort of out of sight, out of mind. And maybe that's a generational thing. I think maybe some younger people, their digital stores aren't out of mind. Like they've got their gaming system, which also has their movies, and they have a sense that these things are real and exist in a space. But for me, I know I have files and they're across a variety of laptops and probably stored in a variety of clouds, and I just don't have a sense of them existing. So the zettelkasten, the Obsidian, I was doing it, but it just feels out of touch. Like it doesn't exist. It's nowhere. I can't see it. The other thing is I was diagnosed with ADHD in 2020. Part of ADHD is some struggles with executive function. So the fewer steps there are to do a thing, the more likely you are to do it. So when I think about, and this could just be also the generational thing or like experience with tech, when I think of going to the Obsidian, I'm like somewhere else in the house and I have this thought or this paper or whatever, am I going to have to go all the way to my laptop and then I'm going to have to open it and I'm going to have to remember where the Obsidian is and how to open it? And do I do // oh, it just feels like so many things. And I'm like, it's probably not a very important thought. And it is much easier to just go, the cue cards are right there. I know where they are. And I can just write things on the cue card and then I put it in the box. It's almost no steps at all. It's like 2 steps. And it's much easier for me mentally just to think. It doesn't get overwhelming.
I think that you'll discover through this process, which we're about to go through, that it is sometimes more steps than that, because you do want to like craft your note so that it is permanent. Of course, you can rewrite them later. You can do whatever you want in your own zettelkasten, but oftentimes, say you're journaling, that's step 1. Right? You're not journaling directly on little pieces of paper. So then step 2 would be to go through and maybe highlight the things that you want to save from that journaling. And then it would be to transfer them into different words in an atomic note style. So like something small and irreducible for the card, and then to slot it in. So it is still steps, but I will say, like, you do all of your journaling on paper. Like a lot of your life and your thought is lived on paper already. And so I think that this is going to be, yes, a smaller leap for you to go from paper to different paper than it is to go from all only ever paper systems to a fully digital system. Great. Let's do it. Okay. Let's go write your first note. So here we are at our desk, and my mom has found this box at Value Village. What an amazing find. And it even came with some tabs for like the alphabet or whatever we end up needing them for. It's going to take, years to fill up just this one single box. So very exciting though. Empty zettelkasten. I understand that you have read some books recently that you took just a couple notes on because you knew you were going to want to start this system.
Right. So the only thing I've done notes for so far this year is just books that I've read.
We're going to start then with like our bibliographic notes because these are kind of like source notes. You should only put a bibliographic note into your system like after you have read the book so that you know everything in here you've already read. I'm just gesturing to this side because I figure you'll put permanent notes in your zettelkasten over here and you'll put bibliographic notes over here. I'm just assuming that because there's already alphabetical things and we're probably going to be organizing these alphabetically by author last name. Does that make the most sense to you for organization of the bibliography?
Yeah, sure.
Let's start then with a book that, you read, but maybe you don't have that many thoughts about. You just want to remember that you read the book. Maybe you want to remember a brief synopsis in case you want to recommend it in the future or whatever, but you're not going to go off on a note spiral necessarily right off the bat. We'll just start with something simple.
So this one.
Let's get out a fresh note card. And right at the upper left, you're going to put Sorel, comma, Gina, and then probably the year, just in case there are other Gina Sorel publications, and then we can clarify by year. And you're probably going to want the book title.
Do you think on the same?
Personally, that's probably what I would do, just because I don't remember the author's names or the year of publication, and whatever information is going to help you understand what's in the note, you want right at the top so that you can just flick through all of your notes and understand what they are at a glance. That's going to make your zettelkasten the most useful. Lumen said that you should only ever use the front side of your notes, because then everything you need to know is visible while you're flipping through. Obviously, that severely limits the amount that you can write. So, that's a rule you're welcome to break if you'd like to, but I would recommend writing a brief synopsis on the front. It looks like you also have other sort of metadata about this book on this note. Like you've written it's 352 pages. Is that something you want to remember for some reason?
No, I don't think. I had been thinking, at the end of the year, I'll know how many pages I've read, but I actually don't care.
Or you might be able to, if someone asks for a long book, you might be able to recommend, but
I'm probably not going to be huge into I don't have a booktube or anything. I'm not going to be recommending just fiction books.
You put that you got it from the library, for instance. Something you might want to include is the publisher, just because I know that you have done academics and you might want to do academics in the future, and if you are citing it, you will need to know the publisher.
I'd like to be able to, at the end of the year, know how many books I read that year and in which month.
Yeah, so wherever you want to put that, and then whatever system you use, if I were you, I would make sure that this third line down is always the publisher's name. Otherwise, you're going to get confused in the future what is HarperCollins.
Okay.
So either just be very consistent and always put the publisher there, comma, where you read it, or, you have to put publisher in front of that so that you remember, because each of these notes should be totally self-contained, and if you go to look at this in the future, 20 years from now, will you remember everything on that and what it means? So if this is the system you want to go with, if that was the most intuitive thing to you, that's fine. Make decisions that are intuitive to you, so your first impulse probably is the right impulse. If you're noticing that you want to know which year you read it in, and that's one of the important things, then you could put that next, as long as you remember that this year is the one it was published in and this year is the one that you read it in. And you could have at the front of your bibliography stack a key card that tells you where everything is on each card, so that you remember every time you put it in to do it in the same order, like a reference card.
So then is there going to be another card where I just list all the books read March 2023, or does it go behind?
That's up to you. So now you only have that much space to fill in the synopsis. And the other thing is, if you were going to make notes about this book, you would also need space to reference those books. You could do that on the front, or you could do that on the back, the referencing. In this case, it probably doesn't matter because you said you don't really have that many thoughts about this book. Go ahead and write whatever your synopsis is, and we'll see how much space that takes and if you like the look of this note at the end. Ultimately, you are going to be doing this every single day, presumably, multiple times a day. So I would not go for aesthetics. For me, I know that I tried bullet journaling and I tried to do it all pretty like people on the internet, and it doesn't stick because you have to do things in a way that is intuitive and natural and easy and fun for you.
That's all I had written before.
Does that still make sense to you? What is this a list of themes?
Yeah, really just what it was about. It was just fun. It was just a fun read.
Okay, cool. Yeah. For me, I like to, after I read a book, write a brief synopsis of everything I remember that happened that I found useful. So if I was reading a fiction book, I'd probably put that on there, but that's also because I'm a booktuber and I want to be able to summarize it for people on the internet. So if that's all you need to remember it by, that's fine. And now in your larger zettelkasten, if you've got a topic of divorce in there, then maybe you'll remember, I read a book about divorce, and you'll be able to cite this book in that note about divorce.
Okay.
Okay, let's toss her in. I guess put it in the S's.
Because this is the bibliography.
Yeah, if there's an S, this is Value Village thing. There's an S.
Goodbye, wise women. Oh my goodness, it sinks. This is so small.
Why is L? Yeah, let's just, we can just take those things out.
Yeah.
Your first note. Zettelkasten's first note. Hooray! Let's move on to something more challenging now.
Okay.
So what's a book that you've read recently that you do have lots of ideas about, and you actually think you might fill out some permanent notes once you get going about it?
Oh yeah, so I took two cue cards of notes on motherhood. So maybe that one.
Pull out a fresh note card and remember the order that you've written things in already. Maybe we'll put that there for reference so that it's the same. And so now you're going to write a synopsis.
I don't know that I put the publisher, because it was an audiobook and I didn't look up who the actual publisher is.
We can look it up later and add it, which you can always do. I do that all the time in my own digital zettelkasten, is if I don't know something off the top of my head and I don't have time right now, I'll leave it blank. And if I do need it in the future, I'll be like, oh, that's blank, and I'll add it. You know, all these things are Googleable. Yep. These aren't our permanent notes. These things we could find online. The synopsis of the book, I do like to write in my own words, and I do like to do from memory so that I know what I got out of the book. So now you're going to write a summary of the book, or things that are like general book stuff. So write as concise a synopsis as you can in that space. Any like ideas that we're stemming off, we can save those for our permanent note collection. So you had written there like, I'd recommend this book to X. Maybe that's something you want to put on this note. Or if it's literally like the main characters were this person and it's important for me to remember their names, you know, you could put that on this note. Whatever your brief synopsis is, or things that you'll want to know when you go looking for this book. Every time you put some note into your zettelkasten, you want to ask yourself, in what future context will I be looking for this information? So when you go to grab this note in the future, what information do you want to be on that card? Obviously, one piece of information you'll want on this card is references to all of your other ideas that came from that note. So you don't need to put every single idea on here. But like, if you're just looking for the card about the book, what do you want to know? Probably want to know briefly what it was about. Maybe the themes like you had put on this one. Okay, so you've got a little synopsis of the book. Do you want to read it for us?
The protagonist uses I Ching to get answers to help her decide whether or not to have children, and about her marriage, career, family, and her own health. The book reads as an honest reflection on depression, family systems, and wrestling with life choices.
I see that like on these cards you've written a lot more than that, like than just a simple summary.
Yeah.
And it looks like there were specific things in the book that made you particularly interested. So, for instance, you wrote here, the woman holds in comparison creating children and creating art as a writer. Is that a binary choice of creating children or creating art? Does that speak to you in some way beyond what the book said, for instance? What does that mean to you? Why'd you write that down?
I wrote it down because I think it's a really worthwhile thing to think about when young women are deciding. They feel pressure from other people to have children, but they want to create art, or they want, you know, I'm a dancer, or I'm a writer, or I created a whole business, you know, a business owner, be like, can't this be my child? Can't this be what I bring into the world?
That's awesome. Maybe that's an idea that you want to remember, and you want to remember where you got that idea from. I mean, if it was me, I might call that note something like, the creation of art is a birthing process, you know? Or
I actually think she says that.
Or maybe there's a note that comes before that. Maybe you have a world idea that is women shouldn't feel guilty for not procreating. And then in that note, maybe you say why you believe that. And then after that, maybe you're going to add a note and say creation of art is a kind of birthing process. What is the logic of this train of thought? Or where
I guess the root thought might be is maybe like creating children is only one of many valid courses for a woman's life to take.
If I were you, probably I would think about what's going to be in this note. For me, it would probably be in Motherhood by Sheila Heti. The character, the woman, holds in comparison creating children, creating art as a writer, as if it's a binary choice. However, what you just said, right?
What did I just say?
So that's your note, and then I would personally, I'd probably start by writing the note and then titling the note. What you decide is like the nugget. What is this tiny irreducible thought?
Right, irreducible. Atomic.
Leave this space for your unique identifier and the title.
Okay.
And then you might want to, that thought probably does fit on just a couple lines. right?
Okay.
So you can leave the last 2 lines or so for your reference space for when you've got more cards in there and you need to connect it to other things.
And you think you would put like in motherhood, start that way? Because that's where I got it from. So that's what this note's about.
If it was me, I would probably be putting in square bracket Hetty Sheila 2018.
Because that's how I'm going to find that.
Exactly, because then for me, I'd be putting square brackets. Maybe that's just what I'm used to with Obsidian. If I see square brackets in my physical zettelkasten, I know that is a note somewhere. I'm sure there's other ways you could do it. Maybe you highlight in pink every time a note appears so that you know it's a note. Whatever works for you. Square brackets would work for me, and it's easier than finding a highlighter.
1 minute later.
So we finished the synopsis, and this first sentence here, you have what you had already written. So in motherhood, what happens? And then down on the 4th line here, she's written, I think young women still, etc. The thought, your thought that extended from here. Mm-hmm. This happened in the book, you extended on the book into your own thought. Some people will put in their zettelkasten just paraphrasing of what happened in a book as opposed to their thought on the book. But the real power of zettelkasten does come from introducing like your own knowledge to it. So like contextualizing things that happened and thinking, right? Doing thinking through writing. Okay. Which is what you've just done. So we didn't end up with any space at the bottom here to give references, and I feel like that'll be a trend. So yes. if you are looking for the references on it, though, you're probably going to take it out anyway. So we've put it on the back. And here's another way that you could reference the source, is you put it on the back with the references, because of course this is a note in itself. So you've just said source, that. There's no other references because there are no other notes in our system. But in the future, if you put in a note anywhere in your zettelkasten that has anything to do with birthing art, for instance, maybe you are reading The Artist's Way, and she talks about this concept, for instance, then you would probably reference this note on the Artist's Way note, and then maybe you'd come over here and write birthing art in your daily practice, and then list all the things that are about that.
Okay.
So the last thing that we want to do with this is title it. We have nothing in our system so far, so we can't ask ourselves, where might this go? We know where this is going. It's the first note, so it's going to be note 1A, and then we want to title.
I'm assuming, I feel like, I needed a better, more important note. This is just like any old note.
A lot of the zettelkasten is doing your absolute best to not prioritize any place within the zettelkasten. Everything is valuable, everything is valid, everything is important, and everything is only as important as it is connected within the system.
You are important.
Yeah, you're kind of important, but there's nothing else around you yet. So you're going to become more important with time. So we need to give this a title because when you're flipping through your zettelkasten, you want to be able to, 1A gives you no information. You want to be able to know what's in this note without having to read the entire note. If you had to boil this down to the thing that when you're looking for this note, you'll be able to find it, or when you might need this idea, what would trigger you to pull out the note?
Having children is just one option. No, that seems awkward. Women can create more than just children. I don't know.
Women can create more than just children. I like that.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter if I like it. It matters if you are going to find this note again, if you call it that. The title should probably be the most clearly written aspect of the note, but as long as you can read it, that's all that matters.
As long as I have my glasses on.
Okay, now we can file it in your system.
Before and after, nothing.
Ta-da! Yay! And we can put our source note in there as well.
Oh, look at that.
Voila! Our zettelkasten has started. Basically, you're going to go on like that.
So because there's more thoughts on this. I had so many thoughts on this, so I would make another one, and they would all refer to the motherhood source note.
Correct.
And maybe they would refer to each other too.
Very possibly. So now you're gonna, sit down and maybe you're gonna have an hour-long note-taking session, and maybe that entire time you only work off of those thoughts. These are your fleeting notes, right? These are the notes you took after reading or during reading, but they're not the permanent notes. They're just like your thoughts. Bleh. vomited
Right.
onto the note cards. Now you need to turn all those thoughts into permanent notes. And as you're doing that, you're probably going to have more ideas for more permanent notes. And that, you could spend hours just making notes based off of this one book and this couple fleeting notes, especially because there's nothing in here to connect to. Like, you need to populate this. Once there's a bunch of stuff in there, maybe you're no longer making new notes, you're actually just making connections within the existing notes. But for now, a lot of your work is going to be note making.
Part of, like, there was one of the themes in this turned out to be intergenerational trauma. A fortune teller tells the woman that she's inherited sadness from her mother and she has to send the sadness back, which is like a way of talking about intergenerational trauma, sort of. So if I did a note on that, would it be to intergenerational trauma? Because that really has nothing to do.
Right. Yeah, so if intergenerational trauma has nothing to do with birthing art, then yeah, you don't want to slot it in right after that, do you? It doesn't connect to that. So instead, you would make it 2A.
Okay.
Yeah, because what comes after 1, 2? If it was directly connected to this, what comes after 1A?
Would be the
1B.
1B.
So those are your only options right now. Because you only have one note in there, you can either make 2A or you can make 1B. That's it.
I took a lot of these notes after I read the book. I didn't take them as fleeting notes during the reading. It would be different if I had done so. It would be more coherent even to myself now if I had done it as I was going.
Yeah, and now that you have the zettelkasten going, I keep a bunch of these note cards with me everywhere I go. I'm constantly making little notes on them. And while you're out at a conference or whatever, you could make your permanent notes as long as you don't put a unique identifier on it until you get home so that you can see where you're going to slot it in. You can't see where you're going to slot it in if you're just like at a conference, unless you've brought your zettelkasten, which it's so small right now that you could bring your whole zettelkasten to a concert and actually do zettelkasten work. But later on, when it's very full, you just bring a bunch of note cards. You can actually make your permanent notes from fleeting notes. If you attended a lecture during the day, make fleeting notes at it, go home in the evening, make your permanent notes, and then when you get actually home to your zettelkasten, slot them into the system where they belong and make references.
So while I'm reading a book, I'm reading along and I'm like, oh, what an interesting thought. It makes me think these things. If I had my note, I could just write the thing from the book, write what it made me think, and then I've got a permanent note. I just haven't titled it or anything yet.
Yeah, you could title it even. You just don't know the unique identifier because that is going to go in a specific place in this system.
And then I would put that aside. And then as I'm reading along and another thing comes up, I would have a whole new card and I would do it on that.
Personally, I would take fleeting notes in a notebook or something. And then at the end of the day or whenever you get a chance, you just flip through all of the notes in that notebook. Some of them are going to be useless. Some of them you're going to want to turn into permanent notes. So usually there's some kind of fleeting note system first where you're just having ideas before you actually understand what those ideas are and then like consolidate them and turn them into atomic individual thoughts.
Okay.
The other thing is when you are taking a note on motherhood, for instance, and it's about intergenerational trauma, and then you remember that you read this other book that dealt with that topic, and maybe you want to reference that book on this note because it's highly relevant. Well, that book that you previously read isn't in your system yet because you didn't have your system. So now that you've made that intergenerational trauma note and you want to refer to this other text, but you can't because it's not in your system, well, maybe now you pull out a note card and make the card for that text. You don't even have to immediately write the synopsis on the card. You could just put it in there and like later when you're doing work in your zettelkasten, just flip through and see what is still blank, what you still need to fill out. Or you could keep those unfilled out notes on the side, whatever you want to do. Like there's a
have a sticky that like yellow sticky means not finished.
Sure, totally. And it's totally possible that you want to make a note called intergenerational trauma and then write what that is, what that means to you. And then on the intergenerational trauma card, that's going to be a kind of hub note where you're just going to reference everything that has to do with intergenerational trauma.
Sometimes it feels like it's going to get confusing because everything is connected, but I guess the whole point is that everything is connected.
Yes, it's going to remove confusion from your life because everything is connected, but when it's all in your brain at the same time, it's impossible to parse out. and use. So everything is connected, and it is a jumble, it is chaos, it is a mess. That is the point. But it's a mess right now in your brain sitting in a pile, or in notebooks sitting in a pile, as opposed to in a system where you could find things in the mess.